Welcome to the Rice Tech Transfer Podcast, where we discuss groundbreaking research that happens at Rice University, the researchers behind it, and the companies that help take it from the research lab into the real world. Today, we're going to be talking with Andy Castillo, the Assistant Director for Licensing at Rice University's Tech Transfer Office. We'll be diving deep into the licensing process, breaking down the key components of university license agreements, and sharing some fascinating tech transfer stories, including how Rice technologies have led to multi-million-dollar and even a billion-dollar acquisition. If you're an entrepreneur, researcher, or just curious about the university's innovations and how they become real-world products, you don't want to miss out on this episode. So that's kind of, the official introduction, Andy. But I like to, have these, informal conversations. Andy Castillo, also my supervisor at Rice University, leading up the tech transfer team. How you doing today, Andy?
Pretty good. How about yourself?
I'm doing good, Thankful that you're here. Thankful that you took time out your day to come chat with me. I always like for the guests to kind of give an introduction in their own words, tell the people a little bit about yourself and who you are.
Okay. So, Andy Castillo. I'm the Assistant Director of Licensing for Rice University Office Technology Transfer. I've been with Rice for 12 years and came into Rice with a background in cancer biology. So I did my PhD at Baylor College of Medicine, did a couple postdocs at MD Anderson. And as I was finishing up my career, or my postdoc career at MD Anderson, I was kind of at the transition point of like, do I stay the tenure track professor track or do I venture into somewhere else? And I knew that there was a lot of grant writing and trying to find the next projects and all that. So I kind of wanted to get something that was a little more 9-to-5 kind of a gig here. And so I started doing some analysis to see what else I could do with my background, my degree, and talked to a couple people in different career paths, talked to a couple in tech transfer, position opened up at Rice and applied for it, and kind of where I am now. So,
all right. Yeah. So you've seen quite a bit, a lot of different changes, a lot of different administrations. When I first got into licensing, one thing I learned about was a deal sheet. Do you have the numbers on like how many licenses, how many options, and all that good stuff?
So I did for a while, but at this point, I kind of stopped keeping track. I've done a couple hundreds of licenses, over the past 10 or 12 years.
Okay.
And I think beyond licensing, there's also other commercialization type agreements that you kind of track all that. Eventually, it just kind of becomes such a big number. It's like you just kind of go forward, go with it. But yeah, a lot of times, and that's something I always tell my junior team members is like, hey, you need to kind of start tracking your projects so you can kind of keep a deal sheet going and understand kind of your output and production. And that way, if you ever need to present it somewhere, you've got those numbers to talk with someone.
Yeah. No, I think I may be up to like, I don't know if I get credit for that last one because I was kind of out on family leave.
You took it most of the way, man. Come on.
All right, so there we go. I got maybe at least 2, maybe 3-ish.
Yeah.
I got a number of options though, and we'll kind of talk about that. But no, it's been like an eye-opening world for me, like new to this. I've come from commercial. I worked in research at Rice University, so I'm really excited about licensing, and I think more people need to know about it. I guess before we go too far into it, I think I don't want to assume that the people watching this already know what licensing is. Yeah. So can you kind of like, number one, just educate us on like, what is a license agreement?
Yeah. So, licensing is something that we do when the university has developed a research project that yields some kind of intellectual property. And oftentimes there's interest in trying to utilize that intellectual property to make products and put products out there into the real world. And so in order to do so, if we filed patents, you want to make sure that you have access to use those patents, because a patent's a tool that the patent holder can use to exclude others from practicing their invention. And so oftentimes what we'll do is we'll try to find companies that are active in these spaces and say, hey, we've got this great research, innovations coming out of the university. We have intellectual property around them. We know you're active in this space. This could be something that fits into your pipeline. So we'll talk with them if they find the match that, this is something that fits into product lines that we've already got in place or something we're developing, then they'll want to get some kind of rights to practice our intellectual property. And most of the time it's patents, but there could be other forms of intellectual property. But usually when we talk about intellectual property, we at the university level, we're talking about patents. And so these licensing agreements basically spell out the terms and conditions that a company will either pay us certain royalties or pay certain fees so that they can utilize the patent rights that we're granting to them.
That's really helpful. I think a lot of people are familiar with like software licenses. Of course, like Microsoft Office is the probably top of mind one that a lot of people think about, but I don't think people realize how much research and technology is available at universities, especially Rice University. And so I think it's great that we have tech transfer available to help commercialize some of these. And we'll talk about like some of these key success stories in a minute. I heard about licensing probably before I got to the office. But one thing that was definitely new to me and kind of a prerequisite to the license agreement is an option agreement, right? And so I think this is something that's very unique. I kind of like to use the analogy when I'm talking to professors about like a house and an option to buy a house. But what's an option agreement and like when does that kind of come into play?
Yeah, an option agreement is basically when you're kind of feeling out to figure out, hey, is this the right IP for us? Is this something that we're ready to take on into a full license? Maybe you're a startup company and you need to secure more funding, or you need to find business partners, or maybe you're an established company and you just need to do more diligence on the IP and make sure that the patent scope, the patent claims cover the products that you're intending to commercialize. And so the option agreement is sort of a contract that says, hey, for a period of time, it could be 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, just depending on how much time is needed to carry out the diligence, that option agreement will hold the intellectual property for that period of time. Usually there's some small fee that goes into it. It's a smaller contract than what a full license would be, so it's something that we can quickly put in place. Less effort to get that contract signed and ready to go. But it's something where a lot of times our startup companies will come to us first with asking for an option agreement so that they can go off and talk to investors and get everything else in order so that by the time they're ready to do the license, they've kind of had that contract ready to go.
Gotcha. We're seeing a lot of like startup companies come out of Rice University, and I think they're somewhat aware of the option. If not, of course, we can like educate them on it. What are some things that you may want to see before actually entering into an option agreement? Let's say I got some money available. I saw you have this technology on your website. Like, can I just have it right off the bat, or do you need something else from me before we get to that point?
I usually say first and foremost, a business plan or like a slide deck is something that's usually helpful for many reasons. For one, it shows me that they've kind of done their homework. They understand what the commercialization path is going to look like. What's the timeline? When do they need to have their funding? How much funding do they need? Who's their business plan going to, business partner going to be? So I think that's helpful because they've already looked into that. They're kind of more aware of what it's going to entail to get the technology commercialized or their startup company launched and such. But it also helps us because then it gives us a lot of the key details that we need. It's like, what is your market? What's your first product timeline going to look like? How soon do you think you need to be into a license? And even if you are going into a license, like what's the commercialization process? Like, are you going to have to go into, if it's a therapeutic, are you going to have to go into regulatory approval? What's your timelines for submitting all of those different regulatory submissions? So it just kind of gives us a better feel for how whenever we go and craft the terms of the contracts, what is that going to look like? It gives us like a starting point to kind of consider this is what they're looking for, this is the timeline, so then we can hopefully build a first draft of a contract that better aligns with their needs.
What's kind of the justification behind it? Because maybe a company's like, hey, I got like a crazy amount of money. I've already raised funding. I don't have everything that you're looking for. I don't really have a slide deck. I got a rich uncle and he's going, front me the money that I need for this. But I guess from like, just so that people can kind of understand the reasoning behind having those things, like, I guess, why do we need those things, so to speak?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just to show that you're kind of aware of like what are going to be the next steps for you. Once I give you your license or your option, what's your next step? Do you already have all the funding, or do you need to go raise more funding? Do you have facilities? Do you have your business team or your technical team? Or is your staff built out? Like how do you build out all these different components to go and launch your company? So I'd rather them have that at least conceptualized rather than to try and wing it on the fly, because then it delays how quickly things will progress to the point where they're actually commercializing the IP.
Okay. So my dad taught me there's no free lunch, right? So like, yeah, you have the option, but in terms of responsibilities, I know one thing that some people may or may not know is like the patent expenses, right? And the responsibility to cover those during the option period. Is there like anything there you want to add in terms of details or just setting expectations a little bit?
Yeah, so oftentimes with an option agreement, like what we usually ask for is that you just cover the ongoing patent expenses. Mm-hmm. So obviously if we've already filed patents and maybe we've built out a big portfolio, we're not going to ask you to reimburse us on all the priors, at least under an option agreement. Once you commit into a full license, then yes, we'll ask for the prior patent expenses to come in and be reimbursed. But for an option agreement, it's really because it's a trial period. You're still doing your diligence to see if you want to go into the full license. We only need them to cover the ongoing patent expenses.
Gotcha.
And primarily because it's like if we're holding the IP for you, then there needs to be some commitment from your side as well to show that, hey, these are still something important and valuable for us.
Gotcha. I attended a webinar with, I think OUP led it, Osage University Partners. I don't know if I should be name dropping people. This is not a sponsored podcast. But OUP, they did like OUP, they do a lot of like educational content. And I went to a webinar they did where they kind of talked about the ability to fundraise with just an option agreement, which I think that's like a big benefit that I don't think everybody knows about.
No, for sure. And that's the thing is like, I know a lot of times people's like, oh, I'm ready to do a license. I'm ready to do a license. But there's a lot of commitment that comes with a license agreement. And so we always try to educate them and know that, hey, you can still go out and talk to investors. You can still go talk to your partners and try to get everything in order with only an option agreement. And I think that's great to hear that you're talking to other people outside of the tech transfer. I mean, obviously, Osage works with a lot of tech transfer offices, but they see the capabilities of what you can do with an option agreement. So I think that's a key thing to highlight is that option agreements, while it doesn't give you the full rights to practice and use the patent rights, it still gives you something that you can go and show, hey, we're in discussions with the university and we've got a contract on the IP so that hopefully they're comfortable enough to give you whatever fundraising you're looking for or business partners that they're looking to make sure that, hey, you've actually got some things in order. That's a big piece is to know that you've got the IP secured.
Yeah, I think it's a great tool for people to use. To your point, you don't want to just commit everything because there's a lot that goes into it, and it's a lot of time and investment that you have to make. I guess from like a human capital point, even to get to like the fully executed license agreement.
Right.
So that option period, make sure you do your due diligence. Like going back to the home analogy, get your inspection, make sure there's no termites and foundation isn't messed up, there's no leaky roof, all that good stuff. Make sure the technology is right for you and your company, and then go from there.
It's their diligence on their part as well, but it also helps us carry out some diligence too, because again, we're hoping to see the business plan. We're hoping to see that they've got some funding to cover some of the ongoing patent expenses, and hopefully everything else falls in place so that when they're ready to exercise their option rights and go into a full license negotiation, we're a little more comfortable that, hey, you guys have got your stuff in order and we're making progress to where you need to be to actually jump into commercializing the IP.
Okay. I guess the workflow, the process, somebody comes across, I guess walk me through that just to kind of summarize this real quick before we get into the license terms. Let's say I'm a startup founder in Houston. I don't have any affiliation to Rice at all. Maybe somebody attends a presentation where a professor is talking about something they created and the professor said, hey, we filed a patent on this. What are the steps in summary that I need to take to get to the license point?
Right. So usually first step is reaching out to our office. We have a couple email addresses. I don't know if you're gonna have post that somewhere.
We got you. We can do like
absolutely. So yeah, we can reach out to us by email, by phone, stop by the office, talk to one of us in the tech transfer office, and explain hey, I saw this technology at this conference or this poster presentation, or talk to Professor so and so. Then what we'll do is we'll go back and confirm. Okay, we understand which IP it is. We've got patents or we've got other IP on it. It's available for licensing. So then we'll come back to the company and it's like, okay, look, this is available for licensing. Tell me a little bit about what you're looking to do with this. We want to understand what markets you're targeting. Are you planning if you're a startup company, are you looking to do something like temporarily where you're just ready to just do an option agreement, or do you want to go into a full license? And so based on that, if you have a commercialization plan or a slide deck, great. We can take a look at that, sit down and figure out, is there a certain market or field of use that you're looking to commercialize in, figure all that information out. And then based on what you're intending to do over the short term, if you're really wanting to go out and talk to investors, maybe a 6-month option agreement is suitable for that. So we can just put in a temporary, or we put in an option agreement for 6 months that gives you maybe some extension periods. That way, if you need to extend it out for a longer time, we can do that. And so that way you can go out and do whatever you need to do. Oftentimes what we do is we have template agreements that we work off of. So we can share a copy of our standard agreement. You can take a look at it. Let us know if there's any concerning language or anything that you need explanation with. We can have a conversation around that. And then, we'd like to work off of our template, but if there are edits or revisions, we ask you guys to kind of go through and just mark it up. We'll talk through the edits you're requesting, try to find some common ground where we're comfortable on both sides. And then finally, once we get the final agreement, then we'll go ahead and move to execution on that.
Great. One question that came to mind, have you ever done, I highly recommend the option before the license, but have you ever done a one where you just went straight into the license with no option at all?
We have. Typically, those are more with established companies,
Okay.
where companies come in and it's like, hey, we see this technology, we've got a product line, we're ready to implement it in, we're ready to go straight into a license. So I think it's more common with an established company.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think. I think there may have been one or two cases where for a startup it made sense to do so, but I think typically with a startup company, the option route is the preferred way to go.
Let's jump into this license. Cause I mentioned earlier, no free lunch, right? So I want to kind of break down, some of the general terms in a license agreement. To my knowledge and the research that I've done, this is on par with basically industry standards across the board. We look at and we benchmark other universities, but I would love to hear your input on some of these different components that go into a license agreement. Sure. Let's start maybe with upfront license fee. So I find some technology, I option it. Now I want to license it. I got to pay you some money up front.
That's usually the case, although we are flexible. But I would say every license usually has at least some kind of upfront component to it. And so typically the way we go about determining what that upfront looks like, it kind of goes depending on the situation. It's a case-by-case basis, but we do refer to sort of what we call comps, comparable deals in the past. So we'll look at the technology that's being proposed to be commercialized under the license, and we'll look at the market, what applications are relevant for that technology space. And then we'll have to look at the scope of what the company is looking to license the technology in. So, for example, if it's a therapeutic and they're looking to go into using that therapeutic only for oncology, well, that may be one segment of the market where that therapeutic may also have applications in treating heart disease or diabetes. There could be a whole host of other technology applications that technology is relevant to. And so if they're only requesting a small market segment, then maybe that fee will be smaller. If they're asking for multiple or all fields, then obviously the value proposition goes up, so that license fee is going to be a little bit higher. But again, startup companies may not have a lot of capital up front, so we understand that, and we don't want to limit them and have them put all their money towards the license. So we want to make sure that they still have capabilities to go on and carry out business and hire staff and faculty, staff and all the facilities that they need to do the commercialization. So for startup companies, usually the upfront fee will be much smaller. But in exchange for that, we'll take that in maybe the form of equity or some later milestones in the license deal.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great segue because the next point on there was the equity as, typical license terms. So I guess, how do we kind of determine what's the right amount of equity, or is there an alternative to equity?
So equity is something that we usually take out, equity within a company. Usually that's in a startup company. So oftentimes we see this with our startups where, again, maybe they have limited cash at hand whenever they're coming and doing the license agreement, but they're more comfortable giving us an equity stake in the company. So these are shares in the company that would go to Rice University. And so I think in cases where maybe it's an established company and maybe they're publicly traded, they don't want to give us equity. So in that case, it may be a heavier upfront, or we can also move it somewhere else. It could be in the royalties, or it could be in the milestones or the annual fees that they pay. So in addition to an upfront fee, there's usually also an annual fee that gets paid just to kind of keep the license going.
Yeah.
So there's what I like to present to the company when I'm going into a negotiation is I say, look, we have all these different components, but they're all levers that you can turn up. You turn this one up, you turn this one down. They kind of balance each other out. But overall, you've got some value proposition for the IP, and you're trying to still collect the same value, but in different fashions, in different components of the license terms.
Okay. And then in terms of equity, I mean, are we asking for like 25, 30% or like
That'd
what
be
is
nice,
it?
but no, we never really go. I think it's typically in the range of like 3 to 5%. It's a pretty small stake. We understand that, especially with early startups, they probably have other commitments where they need to provide equity to future employees and also for future investors. So we don't want to be a big burden on their cap table. So it's usually on the small end, like I said, 3 to 5%.
Okay. And then anti-dilution. What is that? And is that, something that we
So
request?
the other component to equity obviously is the anti-dilution. And so what anti-dilution is typically as shareholders, we have a set pool of equity and certain number of shares. And as future investors come in, obviously they're putting money into the company and they expect something in return. And usually that's additional shares. And because there's a set pool, a set number of shares at that time, sometimes they have to issue additional shares or they pull from the other pools. And so that winds up diluting down the number, I guess, our percentage based on the number of shares we have over the entire number of shares. And so with that dilution, what we're hoping to do with anti-dilution is protect our equity stake for a period of time. We don't ask for protection through, eternity, but usually through some threshold of fundraising, just because we don't want to be diluted out in the early phases when we know the company needs to fundraise. And so oftentimes that equity anti-dilution is usually for the first couple $1 million. It could be $5 million, $10 million. It just depends on, the tech space, how much funding is a company predicted to raise and how quickly. And so we'll try to keep that 3 or 5% equity stake at least for a good portion through the first maybe seed round, maybe a Series A round, just kind of see how that plays out. But it's on a case-by-case basis. We just want to make sure that we don't kind of get pushed down to a very small percentage very quickly.
Yeah. No, all great points. And there's a number of other, I guess, typical license terms. Some of them, the royalties, the annual minimum royalties. Well, I guess that's still kind of royalty. Annual license fees. There may also be some milestone payments in there as well. We can kind of talk about these, but I guess in general, can you kind of speak to like, how do we come up with these numbers? Everybody in our office has a technical background. So I love that because like we like to make decisions based on data and not just like pull numbers out of thin air.
No, absolutely.
But how do we come up with these numbers typically?
Well, and to that point too, we want some credibility behind the numbers we're proposing. So a lot of times what we do is we'll go and we'll try to find comparable transactions, So if we have a technology for a new battery storage material, we'll go and see, have we done deals in that space before? What did the transactions look like? What were the numbers for those other deals? If we don't have them, we'll talk to other TTOs because I think TTOs are very, it's a network that we always are sharing information. We, as you mentioned earlier, we're always surveying and taking input from them to see what's the new standard, what are people doing. But especially when it comes to doing a license deal, we can reach out to other TTOs and say, hey, we're working on licensing a technology in this space. Have you guys commercialized anything similar? And oftentimes we share numbers. So we'll check with other TTOs. There's also other groups within the profession that we can reach out to. So Association of University Technology Managers, that's our professional group that most of us are members of. They also have a comps database, so we can go and pull comparable terms from those databases. Osage University partner, who you mentioned earlier, they also provide a similar service where we can share with them certain details about the IP and the market space, and they can pull us some generalized numbers as well for transactions that they've done or that they're aware of. And so I think a lot of it is really just trying to get that as a baseline so we can know what are the ranges that seem appropriate for this type of technology, for this particular deal, and then use that as a starting point. But again, as I mentioned, maybe it's a startup company where the upfront fee is, these numbers, but they don't have that type of cash. So instead we'll give them a lower number, but then we'll maybe raise the equity. Or maybe the royalty rates are something where it just, doesn't fit into their model and we need to adjust the royalty rates. But like I said, the comps are usually what we start off as just a range of numbers to propose as an initial starting point. And then we just kind of go from there, just kind of whatever the company needs. We try to be as flexible as we can to hopefully we can find some common ground to move forward with.
Yeah. No, I love the way you put it in terms of like the levers where like, hey, you don't have the cash, maybe it's equity. And that, I think that's a great analogy where people can just visualize, okay, hey, this is what we're trying to accomplish. What are you trying to accomplish and what are the limitations and how can we, make it a win-win situation? So I think we do a pretty good job of that. I'm a little biased, but I feel like, I think the deals that we negotiate, I think people walk away feeling like, okay, hey, we had a good experience and we were able to, work within the confines of whatever restrictions they had. And
I mean, to date, there's not, I can't think of a deal that I've had to walk away on. We got close, but usually after a few more discussions, we kind of find some way to get an alternative solution. and we're able to make them all work. So
For sure.
it's something where a lot of times you just have to kind of hear each other out and see kind of there should be a way for us to make this work.
Yeah.
And honestly, for us, the key thing is we want to make sure that we have the opportunity for someone to commercialize our RP, but we also want to make sure that we're responsible to our faculty, our innovators, the university, and that we're providing the adequate revenue to come back based on the commitment that the university had, the commitment that the researchers had to develop the technology.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I didn't have this written down, but maybe even on like the revenue share standpoint, right?
Yeah.
Like if you can kind of talk about that, where you invented the technology as the researcher or the faculty member, the university owns the technology, but you still benefit, your colleagues still benefit. Can you kind of break down like the revenue share model and how that works?
Right. Yeah. So as you mentioned, under university IP policy, and this is very similar across most universities, but typically graduate students, postdocs, faculty, as employees of the university, they have an obligation to assign their IP to the university. So all the research that they're doing, that ultimately becomes owned by the university. But as part of that IP policy as well, there's also usually some aspect of revenue sharing back with the inventors. And so oftentimes there's a percentage that they say, hey, with all the revenue that is generated from the licensing and commercialization of the IP, we share that back with the inventors. And I think for us, we make sure that we explain that to the researchers. So if there's, for example, 3 different technologies that we've licensed, then we come up with a formula so that there's some formula for sharing across those 3 technologies. Within each of those technologies, there may be 3 or 4 inventors. And so then those inventors also get to share their split of that revenue sharing within that technology. And so we usually want the researchers to be involved in this so that up front, they're aware. It's like, hey, we've done this license. So all the money hasn't come in yet, but when the money comes in, we figured out a formula so that when those checks come to the university, they know how much to allocate to this invention and to these inventors. And so it's just a matter of talking with the researchers, knowing, hey, yes, you are assigning your rights to the university, but the hope is that when we commercialize it, you also share in that revenue that comes back to the university.
Yeah, I can look at it from, the inventor standpoint, like putting rights employment behind me. I think a part of me may be like, dang, I created this and now I got to share some of the money with the institution. But on the flip side, a portion of that money, the proceeds, go back into the university and get reinvested in the faculty in the form of like different grants and stuff like that. So can you kind of speak to that?
Right. So in addition to sharing with the researchers directly, there's also a portion that goes back to the university as a whole. There's a portion that goes back to innovation. And it's really meant to go back and support additional research grants and also other resources that the university puts in place. So at Rice, it's a very entrepreneurial school. We have the Office of Innovation now that's coming in to provide all sorts of different programming and resources and facilities to help support commercialization and entrepreneurship. And so now that's where some of that revenue goes into a percentage of the revenue does come back to Office Innovation for them to be able to support a lot of this programming and facilities that are being built out for further commercialization.
Yeah. No, I saw like press releases, Office of Innovation writing out 80 grand, 100 grand checks. I'm like, the money got to come from somewhere.
Right.
And so I think it fosters collaboration and ensures that, okay, hey, as faculty members and students and staff come up with stuff, they have the resources to help them develop it and commercialize it.
Absolutely.
So I think it's good. Man, we got all the logistical stuff out the way. I mean, there's other information. People can definitely check out the website. But I was excited to talk to you because you've been here 10 years, so you've seen a lot. You've done a lot of deals yourself. And when I first joined the office, I remember I reached out to Nicole. I was like, hey, Nicole, she manages finances. I was like, can you give me a breakdown of like the top 5 licensing deals from like a monetary amount in terms of, okay, hey, this company licensed technology, it was acquired for X amount of money, or hey, this company licensed technology, this is how much they paid us in royalties. And I was blown away by, the top 5, at least from the press releases I read. We'll save the biggest one for later. But the first one that really caught my attention was Volumetric and the fact that they were acquired by 3D Systems for hundreds of millions of dollars, I believe, on the news release. I don't know.
Yeah, $400 million, yeah.
That's a great success story that kind of speaks to, one, the fact that this technology was developed on campus. Yeah. And I saw it was developed by a faculty and one of their students. I would have loved to have been a student in the lab, by the way. But to see them then go out and commercialize it and then for that to be acquired, that's an amazing story to me for 400 million. Can you kind of like break down that story of Volumetric?
Yeah, so Volumetric Bio, startup company that was formed by Jordan Miller, the faculty, and his grad student at the time, Gregorian. And, they came to us. I remember whenever they came to us with the initial invention, proposed it to us. Sounded really interesting, so we filed on the IP. And oftentimes when we have researchers come to us with their intellectual property or their research, we oftentimes ask them, it's like, do you have any ideas around commercialization paths, or would you yourself like to commercialize it? Would you like to do a startup company? And in this case, the answer was yes, they wanted to do a startup company. And so we worked with them to try to put the license agreement in place. And at the time, this was Volumetric Bio, so it was a startup company. And we implemented a lot of the tools that we had discussed previously, some cash up front and some equity and all the other milestones and royalties that come in with a traditional license. So it was very, very commonplace for a startup license, nothing super crazy. But then, we signed the deal, they went on, they were actually selling product and such. And so then at some point they came to us as like, hey, we want to talk because we think we might have an acquisition on the radar, and we want to see what we can do. And so they shared the details with us and so on. And then from that point forward, it's like, yeah, we went through and put all the acquisition papers in place, signed that, and company wound up buying Volumetric Bio, bought out Rice for our equity stake. And so the university did benefit from that, which again, in turn went back to some of the inventors as well, because they were researchers on the IP. So, it was a win-win for the researchers, the inventors, as well as the university. Ultimately, 3D Systems took Volumetric into the company. They continued to carry on their research as part of the company. And I think Jordan and Bergrat also wound up going and working for the company. So it's a really good story because it's like faculty and student create IP, license it, go in and work in the industry sector and translate that research into commercialization.
That's cool. Do you know, I guess from a timeline standpoint, do you have a rough idea, a rough recollection of from license to acquisition? And it varies for every situation. So
right, yeah. This one was pretty quick.
Okay.
I think it was probably on the order of 2 years, I believe. I think it was somewhere maybe 2019 or so, and then 2020, 2021. It was probably close to 2 years from when we signed the license to when the acquisition went down.
Dang, okay.
So, very quick, yes.
That's amazing. Let me ask you, what would you do, if you were a faculty member, let's go back in time, you didn't go into tech transfer, and you were a faculty member, and you have an invention that you patent, do you think you would go the startup route, or you think you would try to go the license it and just, as I like mailbox money, where you just get a check in the mail every month in the form of a royalty or whatever.
Yeah.
But I'm curious to know, you personally, what you would have do.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting question, because I think it's hard to do both, obviously, because there's so much that goes into being a faculty and running a lab.
Yeah.
But then there's also so much that goes into doing a startup. So that's a tough question. I think being on this side and seeing so many startups and what it entails, to me, it feels like having the mailbox money is probably the better route for me, because I really enjoy the research part of it. The business side is great,
Yeah.
Fortunately, I'm in my role now where I am now, and I can keep just kind of do the deals and see all this go through. But if I were back in the research world and had a lab already going, to me, I think because I'd already established my lab, carrying on the research lab and then just taking in the mailbox money is probably...
That's a good point. Yeah, I can see that. And you and I got kids too,
Exactly,
and wives. So it's you can't.
Yeah, my
really
wife probably would have killed me if she said, "Hey, I'm leaving my day job to go and do a startup company." So
passing up a faculty salary to go
yeah.
Okay. Yeah, no, I'm sure my wife would probably say the same thing. I don't know. It depending on the technology, I might swing for the fences though.
Yeah. Now, the other thing to consider is sometimes faculty can have more of a technical role and advise the startup. Whereas maybe they have a graduate student that's about to graduate, and the graduate student takes the company forward. So
yeah, I think that's the best of both worlds, in my opinion. You have depending on the team that you have in place and the team that you can build. If you believe in the technology wholeheartedly, and you can be chief science officer or whatever,
exactly.
I think that's probably the best way to go.
Yeah, and honestly, that's what we're seeing a lot more. So the story with Jordan and Bergrat, that's not. I mean. Yes,
it's not common.
It's not common, but it happens. It happens. But that's not the typical route we see with our startups. Usually the faculty stay and run their labs and do so, but they're more of an advisory role. But they have a graduating grad student or a postdoc that's finishing up, and they're the ones that transition out and kind of help the company get going.
Okay. I got to get Jordan on the podcast. We got to make that happen.
Absolutely. I mean, he probably tells a story way cooler than I do, but it's certainly a great from beginning to end, and seeing how the research translates out and company comes in, swoops them in. It's a pretty nice story to be able to tell. So
for sure. No, we'll make it happen. But man, so the one that really blew me away when I heard about this story, this startup that licensed rice technology and was then acquired, was ProMED. $1 billion exit, $1 billion acquisition.
Yep.
So you got to break down this, because I'm like, this is kind of crazy.
Yeah. So ProMED, I mean, that's a startup company that actually was formed before I came to the office.
Okay.
So this dates back to probably like the mid 2000s, like 2004, 2005. Okay. And so there was rice faculty, and I think it was this postdoc at the time. Richard Gomer was a rice faculty member. So they formed ProMED at the time. I think it had a previous name, but then a year or two later they renamed it to ProMED. And I don't know all the details on the early licensing because that predates me, but we had a license agreement in place. They went through the fundraising round, did the early clinical trials and studies and such. And that was a much longer timeline. So that was on the order of probably 13, 14 years.
Okay.
Now, and again, this is more for a therapeutic. So there were regulatory pathways that had to be navigated. There was the preclinical data and the clinical data that had to be developed, and so on and so forth. So much longer timeline, whereas for volumetric and 3D systems, they're 3D printing. So obviously when they get to that point, there's still the regulatory path. But I think on the modality of printing that they were using and the inks and everything that they were generating, a much quicker timeline with volumetric and 3D systems. But ProMED much longer. But with that deal, the license are already in place when I came to the office. But I believe it was in 2017 or 2018. ProMED came to us, and same story. They said, hey, we're talking with people. We might have an acquisition on the radar. And they said, in this particular case, it's like, hey, but the big issue is that they want to see some adjustment with our license terms. And so they came to us, and we talked about what the concerning points were with our license agreement. And so what we wound up doing is doing a temporary, basically kind of like an option agreement, where if we agree to these adjusted terms if the acquisition came through. Okay. And what they wanted to be able to show for the acquiring company was like, look, we've already made this arrangement with the university. You raised these concerns about the terms. They've agreed to adjust these terms if the acquisition goes through. And so that went on, I don't know, maybe 12, 16 months or so. And they finally came back to us and it's like, hey, I think we're going to go ahead and go forward with this. We're going to be acquired, and we'd like to exercise the option so that those terms can be amended into our license agreement. And so from there forward, like you see in the news, in the press releases, 1.4 billion acquisition, and it wasn't all paid up front. And so there were some, follow-on payments and whatnot. So
yeah,
but I think it was just under $400 million that were paid on that initial transaction. And fortunately, in that case, the university had equity in ProMED, so we had our equity stake bought out. And so it's one of those deals where it's the university benefits, but as well the faculty, because the IP policy distributes to the inventors, they also were able to benefit from that.
Okay. I need to talk to Nicole again and see if she can do the math on like what was the revenue share on that. But I won't disclose that, but I'm just thinking like that has to be a crazy amount of,
Yeah, it was probably a fair amount of money, and I think there were maybe only 2 or 3 inventors on that IP. So
okay,
yeah,
all right. No, man, I mean that's a great story, and I think that really just caught my eye because Rice is a prestigious university, but like these type of stories don't always get like the press that you would think they should. Yep. $1.4 billion acquisition that happens from a startup built on technology developed at Rice. That's pretty impressive. Yeah,
and it's crazy because even before I came, at the time it wasn't a big deal, but like we didn't have a whole lot of news about ProMED, and it was in my portfolio, so I was actually managing that license.
Yeah.
And so when they came to us and they told us who the acquiring party was, and it was like, wow, this is really cool to get a big time pharma come in and take a technology that came out of a Rice lab and to be able to show that, hey, they've got interest and want to commercialize this. So
Yeah. And I think the interesting thing too is that like you guys were willing to renegotiate in a sense the license, because like you already had terms that with ProMED, like technically they're legally binding. You don't have to like renegotiate in a sense to help them out, but I think that was pretty cool that you guys were willing to do that.
And I think the end story there is that, it benefited both sides. We wanted to make sure that the technology had a path forward, and it didn't do any good for us to stifle that and inhibit that acquisition, because yes, this was a startup company. They carried it so far, but at some point you do need to have, and especially in the pharma world, you need to have the big guns come in to be able to commercialize that.
Yeah.
And so, as we considered the request, we said, hey, it just makes sense. We want to make sure that we have the ability to see the technology all the way through. And we knew that with a large pharma coming in, there would be additional resources that would carry it on through the next phases of the clinical studies.
Yeah.
So, that was something that I think was a win-win for everyone.
So one thing I forgot to mention or ask you. So we're thinking about like large lump sums, like $400 million from 3D System, $1.4 billion from Roche. They buy out our equity stake. Do we typically still get royalties from those agreements?
Yeah. So
even after that upfront lump sum?
Yes, because they're only buying out our equity stake. The license terms are still in place.
So any kind of royalties, any kind of milestone payment,
right?
Any other?
So any products that those acquiring companies wind up selling based off of our IP, they would still adhere to the terms of the license agreement, and so that if the original license had, for example, say a 5% royalty, well, then they would still pay us that royalty on the product sale.
So these faculty members are still getting paid potentially.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but I think this is especially with the ProMED, that's even though I can't give all the details to companies when I'm negotiating with them.
I won't tell anybody.
Like one thing I like to point out is like, look, just because we agree to the terms now is not to say that if a situation arises where we need to make adjustments, we're open. We want to make sure that we give the technology the opportunity to go, to the market. And so just because in 2004 we agreed to these terms, this royalty or this fee or whatever, doesn't mean that when we have a Roche that says, hey, we want to license this, we want to acquire this company, but we need to adjust the terms, we're going to consider it, and we want to make sure that we give the best opportunity.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I got to take Jordan Miller out to drink or something. I need him. I need to make friends with him. That's really impressive. What's been your favorite deal that you've either favorite deal or biggest deal that you've negotiated? You can share.
I would have to say that Roche deal was pretty nice, especially because like the fact that even though I didn't do the original license when the acquisition was kind of on the table, trying to renegotiate the terms with the prospect that, hey, you might have a major pharma player come in and commercialize this. You kind of have to get the numbers right to where you're able to facilitate the transaction, but still have good terms for down the road if there are products being sold, that revenue is still coming back to the university. And so I think doing that initial option on the terms and kind of the anticipation to see if they're going to come back and do the actual acquisition, that was it was you could feel the pressure building. It's like, hey, we're getting down to the last few months of the option term. Are they going to come and do it or not? And ultimately they came back, and then once they said that, I was like, yes, we got it. So that was probably one of the highlights of the transactions that I've worked on in the past. But I think every deal is unique in the way that there's always some gap that you're trying to overcome. And are there deals where it's like simple and straightforward? There's a couple, but majority of them, there's something you always got to figure out. And it's being creative and trying to find a way to still preserve what the university needs, but also help and meet in the middle somewhere where the company or the startup is able to move this forward. I think that's the biggest gratification out of this, is like you were able to solve a problem and try to make this carry on.
Yeah. Now I've been at this a lot less. I've been at this a lot less than you have, a lot shorter time period. But I've noticed that each discussion, whether it's an option or a license, there's always something new, something different.
Yeah.
And that is something that, like, I love about the job, where, hey, it's not going to be the same exact deal. Something you're going to learn from this, something where you'll be able to take a lesson learned previously and apply it to this, but then also you're going to learn something new from this. Even if it's so much of it is a people-facing type of role, like, being able to deal with different personality types and get at the core of what the issue is that they're facing.
Yeah. I mean, to that same point, like there have been technologies where we've had multiple interested parties. And so like we'll negotiate with one party because we either carve it up by fields or, different ways to partition up the license, but we'll work with both parties and say, okay, look, you're going to get this, but we'll have to negotiate the license terms. It's the same IP, but you negotiate the terms, and what's important to them is probably not important to them. So the deals that we've done in some of those cases look completely different. But if you look at the overall value proposition, you're trying to say, okay, how much value overall is the university getting? They're fairly similar, but one may have more cash up front, one may have more equity, or one may have a different royalty, but it's the same technology. So that's the thing I always point out is like, yes, we try to fit in within the comps that we find for a particular technology, but it's always based on where the deal goes and what are the needs of the company to make sure that they're comfortable to move this forward. So, I think that's perfect. It's like every deal, however similar the technology is, every deal is going to be different.
Yeah. And I think that field of use thing in terms of carving up the IP is something that's really unique because it's like, I didn't know that you could do that. I just assumed, hey, it's one patent, only one person can have it. Yeah. But you're basically saying, hey, like, let's say it's a medical device and it can be used for, I don't know, cancer treatment, and it's a medical device, but you can use it for diabetes or whatever. Like, you can carve it up to what one person plays in this sandbox in cancer and other in diabetes.
Yeah, and ideally, we'd like to do that with every technology, but, not every technology is conducive to that. But when the opportunity presents us to be able to maximize with multiple partners, heck yeah, we're going to try and do that and do as many deals as we can. Yeah. I mean, now we're obviously talking with an exclusive license. There's also a non-exclusive license, and non-exclusive basically means that, hey, we're giving you access to this patent in this field or in all fields or whatever, but we can give the same license to somebody else. And so in certain cases, companies are fine with that. But a lot of times they're going to want exclusivity. They don't want you to give the same patent in the same disease indication or for the same application space to a competitor. So that's where usually exclusive licensing is the majority of what we do. Yeah. But there is the possibility of non-exclusive in certain cases.
Okay. We talked a lot about patents, which is, primarily what we deal with. But one of the biggest eye-opening moments for me was working in the office and realizing that we can license technology that's not patented.
Yeah.
So what does that look like? Because that kind of shocked me when I first heard it. So like, what type of technology are we licensing?
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think probably the most common alternative IP deals with like copyright. Usually that comes into play with like software. So if someone generates a software platform, there is the ability to pursue patent protection on that. It can be tricky at times, but you can file a patent on it, but a lot of times there's also IP in the actual source code that's written for that software package. And, somebody could rewrite the source code, but if you've already generated the source code, it's optimized and it functions well the way you've created it, then a lot of times companies want that piece of IP. It saves them from the fact of having to go and recreate it. So we have done software license deals, some that have patents, but a bunch of them usually just rely on copyright or the source code. So there are other forms of IP. A lot of times these could be in like biological materials. So, we have a very big bioengineering department at Rice, and there's a lot of synthetic biology, cell engineering, and such that, these companies that are active in this space, maybe they don't want to go out and recreate an engineered cell line, but they want to be able to use it in their research studies. So they'll reach out to our office and they'll say, hey, we're aware of Professor so-and-so that engineered these cells to do this. We'd like to see if we can use it for research purposes. And so we'll do, a research license where they can license the ability to receive some of the physical material, maybe those engineered cells. They'll get a vial of those cells and they'll use them for their research studies. And the benefit there is that if it works well and they ultimately say, this worked well in our R&D, we're going to fit it into one of our commercial pipelines, maybe they'll come back and do a license on either the cell line or maybe we've got patents or other IP on those cells. So it's kind of maybe a stepping stone to further either partnership or even commercialization of the IP that we have on that.
Gotcha. No, all those, the software one, I kind of knew about that, but didn't really, when I heard tech transfer and the patents, that's kind of what my primary, had tunnel vision on that.
Yeah.
But the software, the data used, the materials, all that, that was shocking to me in a good way, surprising in a good way.
And there are also licenses where it may have a patent, it may have some biological materials, it may have software. Like you could do a license to all three different forms of IP, and so the license would just have all that spelled out, saying you're licensing this patent, you're licensing this cell line, and you're licensing this software package. So it's just a matter of whatever the commercialization path is for that platform. If there's some ability to license beyond the patent scope, and some of these materials or other forms of IP are important, we'll go forward and make sure that we incorporate that into the license. But then on the opposite side, software, sometimes there are software licenses where it's purely just on the actual software source code and the copyright.
Okay, we're kind of coming towards the end. What are you most excited about? Either on the research side or in the tech transfer, space, like AI, everybody's talking about it. My dad may even talk about ChatGPT, and I'm like, what are you doing? Knowing about that? But
Right.
AI is big. I mean, we're seeing a lot of stuff in digital health. I do a lot in the engineering space, so I'm seeing more like digital health initiatives and stuff like that. Clean tech is huge. I've seen a lot of that over the years. But and you're in the life sciences space, which is new to me. But what are you most excited about, and where do you think a lot of opportunity is at?
Yeah, I think that's right. My background's always been in the life sciences. So doing my postdocs and graduate work in the med center, coming from like a medical school, medical research institution, especially like MD Anderson, that's very hardcore in the cancer biology space. That was my background. But like as I come into now to Rice and seeing all of the different disciplines that come in and intermingle with the life sciences, it's really cool to see AI in life sciences. Or AI in the material science. Like there's so much that goes in, and all these interdisciplinary technologies that are coming forth is really cool because, maybe I get to understand the life science aspect, but I get to see, the other materials that are coming in from the material science space that are being applied in life sciences, or all the computational stuff that's going into generating large data sets that ultimately have some commercial value. So I think it's really cool because it seems like a lot of that is really bringing in all the different facets of this discipline, that discipline, so that you really got a big mix of technologies that are going and going ultimately being commercialized by a lot of these companies. And I think with the startups that are coming forth, you're seeing that as well. That it's not just you're doing a startup on a pharmaceutical. It's like you've also got a pipeline for drug discovery and such. So there's so much that goes into it, and I think it's really cool just to see to be on the side where you see it all come across the table. And I know you guys are doing all the deals, and I work with you guys to try to get those across the board. But like seeing how we can be able to navigate a license in all these different disciplines is really nice. And I think as well, all of the resources that the university is putting forth for commercialization and entrepreneurship is really cool because, it's doing startups is not easy, and having the resources at hand to kind of help the students and postdocs and faculty that want to do startups is really nice. So I think it's an exciting time for tech transfer because it's something that we've always strived to have is these resources and everything for the startups to be able to get going and do what they need to do. And I think we're starting to get a lot of those pieces in place.
Yeah, no, it definitely is. I think, especially in the startup space, I've probably done worked with probably 5 different Rice affiliated startups, either on an option or a license, just in the last year. And I know that I've been having discussions with other people who are thinking about a startup, but they're just not ready yet. Yeah. So I definitely see there's a lot of excitement and traction. So I think it's really cool to kind of be on the cutting edge of it. And that's the thing I love about being in the academia, environment is that, I learned about GPUs and GPU processing probably like in 2010. And now I'm kicking myself because I ain't buying NVIDIA stock. But, just to see hey, these are things that you're learning about way in advance of them becoming commercial products and everything. So that's exciting. Last question. I kind of want to do a little bit of foreshadowing here and potentially in terms of potential guests. But you mentioned it's not just one piece of IP anymore. It's an entire pipeline, whether it's drug discovery or biotech or stuff like that. I've seen some press releases about Rebel, RBL. I want to have some guests on in the future who maybe can speak to that. But what can you kind of speak about in terms of Rebel, what it is, and like what's coming down the line?
Yeah, and obviously, I think you probably need to reach out to Paul Walton because he'll probably be a great spokesperson for what they've got going on over there. But the Rice Biotech Launchpad, that's sort of a resource that the university has put in place to help sort of incubate some of these ideas to get students and postdocs that are thinking about doing a startup to get them up and going so that if they do launch a startup company, then they can go into Rebel. And Rebel is what we have over in Helix Park. And that's intended, I think, to provide some of the early stage resources for these startups to do some of the R&D that they need so that they don't have to go and invest and secure their own facilities and buy all this expensive equipment when they've got limited cash on hand. And I think they also provide other mentorship and resources to help them navigate, plan for the regulatory pathways and the clinical data collection and so on and so forth. So, it's a really cool resource that the university has put in place to facilitate more of these biotech startups, because that's a whole different facet of technology commercialization because there's so much more involved, especially with the regulatory pathway that has to be addressed.
Yeah.
And so the Rice Biotech Launchpad, I think, is sort of the starting point where these ideas kind of get incubated. Once they've kind of they're ready to do the startup, startup spins up, goes into RBL or Rebel, and then they carry on and try to do the real commercialization there.
That's good. I like it. I think I got 3 little kids, and some of them are in like grade school, so I'm like always pray for me, but I'm always like in dad mode. But wraparound services is a term in like grade school where you're helping the entire student. Hey, maybe they need help with lunch, maybe they need help with after school tutoring, maybe it's like athletics, whatever the case may be. And so I kind of think about that wraparound services for like the startup where like, okay, hey, you got the technology, but you a technical person. You need the business people as well.
Yeah.
You need the facilities, and that's where like you have Ion, Greentown Labs. You need the funding. Maybe that's Office Innovation. So I think it's great to see us have like a cohesive, comprehensive approach.
No, for sure. I think you hit it perfectly with, yes, the researchers are the technical experts on what the innovation that they've created, but being able to bring that out of the lab and to push it into, commercialization pipeline takes so much more, the investment side, the business side, and so on. And so I think with the various resources that the university is putting in place, we're in a much better spot than we were when I first came to Rice. So, and I think it's great to see all this up and coming interest in trying to do more commercialization. But I think the future is just, it's great to see kind of what that holds for us.
For sure. It's real exciting to see everything happening right now. So, man, no, that's I could go on and on. These are the type of conversations we typically have, like just the two of us. Yeah. And it's the same thing now, it's just cameras and John helping out over there. But, I think like it's always interesting talking about these different deals. So I appreciate you coming on here. And you did great for your first time, man. Make sure you tell the wife and kids. I said you did amazing, man.
Well, we'll see. I'll have to watch the video before I blab my mouth on that. But yeah, we'll see how it turns out.
All right, cool. Hey, man, so we'll put the information on screen or in the description. But if people want to learn more about what technology we have at Rice, if they want to get in contact with our office, how do they do that?
Yeah, so we have a website, our tech transfer website, that has a lot of the contact information, but there's also an available technology portal on there. So people can go in and search at their leisure. They can put in keywords, categories. They can search for certain faculty members and see what innovation we have available for commercialization. But yeah, if they find something or if they need help finding technologies, they can reach out to one of us in the tech transfer office. The licensing team obviously is sort of the first and foremost the one to help out with that, but anybody in the office can help out and redirect. But yeah, just reach out to us. Let us know what you're looking for. If you already have something identified, we can kind of do the diligence and see if it's available, and then we'll kick into the discussions to see if an option or license or some other form of contract is a better way to go. But we just want to have the dialogue and understand who's interested, who's looking, and see how we can partner with them.
All right, cool. Well, yeah, that concludes it for this episode of the Rice Tech Transfer Podcast. Make sure you stay tuned so you don't miss out on any of this great content. And be sure to check out the Tech Transfer website so that you can see what technology we have available. But that's it for this episode.